Are you looking for a new camera for your church's live stream, trying to up the game a little bit? Well, the Panasonic GH5 is still my #1 recommendation for churches looking for a live stream camera that's under $1,500. I've got a whole bunch of reasons why I love this camera and a couple of drawbacks that you'll need to consider for your setting, but I don't think you can go wrong with the GH5. Let's talk about it. When you're considering the different cameras that are under $1,500 for your church, there's a few that kind of rise to the top, right? You've got the Blackmagic Pocket 4K or like the studio cameras that they offer, which I would not recommend. The Pocket 4K is a great camera. I like the GH5 a little better for a few reasons for most use cases that I'm going to unpack. You got things like the Sony ZV-E10 or some different camcorders and stuff. But the GH5 has a long list that I'm about to jump into of why I love it. Number 1, the sensor stabilization is great. The sensor stabilization on the GH5 combined with lens stabilization built into the lenses gives such a great feel that our guys hand hold the GH5. Now, our roamer uses this gimbal to get some more movement shots, but our stage cam guys are literally just hand holding a GH5 and it looks amazing at 100 millimeters, which is equivalent to 200 mil. So don't sleep on sensor stabilized cameras. It's really handy for not only hand holding, but putting on to gimbals, also putting on to sliders and things like that to eliminate micro jitters. And it's a big benefit. Number 2, battery life. It's not something that most people consider when you're looking for cameras, but something like the Pocket 4K, you're gonna run out of batteries pretty quick. You're gonna go through stuff and have to rig up V-mounts and different things like that. We use our GH5 batteries for each service and they're still going strong after years. And so things like putting it up on a cable cam or rocking it on a gimbal throughout a whole service, the camera, we're not having to worry about is the camera battery itself going to die and having to rig up contraptions. So battery life is really good on the GH5. Speaking of gimbals, these are really gimbal friendly. They're a bigger mirrorless camera compared to like a Sony or something. But when you think about a Blackmagic Pocket 4K and all the rigging you would have to do to that, you really would need to upgrade from like, this is the Ronin SC. We would need to go like the RS2 or RS3 to comfortably do like a Pocket 4K. And the articulating screen, I feel like is a really good benefit for when you're rocking the gimbal because of the way this one sits, being able to just touch to focus and things like that. But the weight distribution on it with the size of lenses that you use with a Micro Four Thirds, this is a 35 to 100 equivalent to a 70 to 200. The size and form factor makes it where our guys, our teenagers are going around doing gimbal work all throughout worship, no problem. And speaking of lenses, that's one of the other benefits to me is all of the lens options that you have. When I first started out with the Panasonic line of Micro Four Thirds cameras, these lenses behind me are all vintage lenses that I bought for really cheap, and you can adapt old EF and different types of glass onto that smaller sensor and use third-party glass and vintage stuff and use things off eBay, and it still can work really well. But if you do want to eventually get into the native Micro Four Thirds lenses, they're super sharp. They're more affordable than like going Sony G Masters and things like that or Canon L lenses for sure. And the size is definitely still a big savings. You're not having to worry about, how can I rig this giant lens onto my gimbal or onto this slider camera? And you get more reach out of that with a smaller, more compact size, especially with the lenses. So to me, the lenses are a big benefit just of the Micro Four Thirds land in all, but that's just a side benefit of having the GH5. GH5 is good enough for me in low light. If your church has decent lighting, I believe in my experience, you can get up to ISO 1600 comfortably. And for a live stream, nobody's going to notice grain in the image or anything like that makes the image really suffer or color shifting. So we're usually keeping ours at about ISO 640, somewhere in there, f2.8 at 80 shutter speed because of our TV flicker on stage. So I think the low light performance is good enough, and you could also pair these with a GH5S that has incredible low light with dual native ISO if you needed a locked off shot with a lower f-stop to really close down that focus plane. And how about the full-size HDMI port? That's become huge to me the longer that I've live streamed. I'm getting a little tired of having to, cage up things that have micro HDMI. Micro HDMI is starting to drive me crazy just because it's so flimsy. And so having that full-size HDMI port is a huge benefit. It's just another great thing about the GH5 that I love over its little brothers. But it is a good big brother. And that's one thing I love about it, is that it plays nicely with its lower tiered family members. The G85, the Panasonic G7, even like the DVX200 that we've got it paired with. It really works well. We started out with GH4s and they all match well. And that's a benefit because say you go pocket 4K. Yes, it's a cinema camera and you can get maybe better colors out of it. But it doesn't have anything underneath that you can help supplement your live stream build out with. A G85 is $700, a GH4, a G7, those are down there in the cheaper range. They don't have all the benefits of a GH5, but they play nicely together. And I think that's a big benefit, is that it's just a good family member. And the GH5 is packed full of great features, whether that's focus peaking or false color, histogram, exposure helps with zebras, but it also does things like shooting in 4K 60, which we use all the time for B-roll, or shooting in open gate 5K, where maybe you want to have room to crop vertically for Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, but also be able to crop for wide all at the same time. That's a cool benefit. And so the GH5 is packed full of cool stuff. You can even upgrade to like Vlog and do LUTs into the camera and stuff like that to get more out of the sensor. So I think that's a big benefit. Which goes to my next point of that it is a photo capable camera, and we use this for photos all the time around the church. It's 24 megapixel, I think, which is plenty, and the raw photos out of it edit really nicely. I've used this for real estate. I've used this on safaris in Africa. I've used this for tons of portraiture, senior photos. Don't tell me it's not a good photo camera. It's not full frame. It's micro four thirds, but you can get great images out of this. Some of my favorite images are just with this lens all the way out at 100 mil and gives a swirly bokeh background. And so, you can't do that with something like the Pocket 4K. And for most churches like mine, cameras being multi-purpose when you're spending $1,200 is a big benefit. That's one of the reasons I don't like PTZ cameras or something like that. It's so limited to one function. And we use these around the church every week for video announcements, for different things. And I think that's a big benefit. But it is not a perfect camera, so let's talk about a couple of the drawbacks. This camera is not for you, in my opinion, if your church does IMAG. What is IMAG? Image magnification, where you've got the camera live feed on your screens in the room at the same time. The reason is that the HDMI outputs of these Lumix cameras has quite a bit of latency. In my experience, it's around 4 frames of latency or so, and that's going to be too much for IMAG in the room, in my opinion. It's going to be a little distracting when the audio is actually getting there to people that far in front of the video. And the other drawback for some people may be that the autofocus in live video mode, continuous autofocus, is not very good. I've used it in a pinch, but for the GH5, this older model, I wouldn't trust it. Now, that's not a big deal for me because live streaming, we don't use continuous autofocus. And I really would not recommend that. What we do and works really well with the GH5 is either the push to autofocus or just the drag the box and it will grab focus. So say our camera operators switch to a new spot and they need to grab focus, they'll just touch on the monitor or push to focus, or you can always focus on the lens and it'll grab it really well and consistently with the autofocus. That's usually how we do that. So while it isn't a great autofocus system, it's still contrast-based detection. It's not the new phase detection. But beyond those couple of drawbacks, I can't think of much that would cause me to not recommend this camera for a church to use for their live stream. So if you want to go ahead and pick one up, they are still selling these brand new. You can buy them on Amazon. I'll link that in the description. Appreciate you using that link. It doesn't cost you anything. It just gives me a tiny kickback. Even if you click on that link and you end up buying something else, I still get a small portion of that. So use that link. There's other options out there. Just really consider before you start building out your system which way you want to go. Do you want to be able to live shade cameras through the ATEM software? Well, then maybe go with Pocket 4K. We've never had a need to do that. Our lighting doesn't change that much. So I love the GH5. We just bought another one. I feel like it's going to give us lots of years to come. We're not going to 4K streaming anytime soon, even though we could do that with the GH5s if we wanted to. But I hope this information was helpful as you continue your search for the best video camera for live streaming in your church that's maybe under that $1,500 mark. If you're under $1,000 and you can't do anything above that, look at the Lumix G85. Can't be beat under $1,000, especially around $650, in my opinion. You got the ZV-E10 in there, maybe the Canon RP at $1,000, but in my opinion, the G85 wins out over those as well. This one, just for a few $100s more though, really kicks it up another notch. So remember guys, we do a lot of great things. Let's do it all for God's glory. We'll see you in the next one.